Well, we're going to open it up for questions. And so now is really a good time to think of your questions, but I'm going to lead off. Leanne, I'm going to start with you. Do you think that the field of psychiatry is now ready for these more synergized and predictive approaches that both you and Olu have spoken to so effectively today?
Thanks for that great question. Let me check the microphone is on. Yes. I'm very optimistic about, as you may have gathered, I absolutely think we're ready. I actually think it's essential because we need to be collecting data that is relevant to how the information is being used in clinical practice. So we do these studies in a lab-based setting. I think we really need to move into doing trials where we prospectively use the information we're finding so we can really pin down, is it effective when it's deployed to guide or support a treatment decision? So yes.
And what about individuals where they may not have access to imaging? Is there a future that we can see for them?
I believe so. And I am very inspired by how this has been thought about in other fields. Cardiology is one, oncology, migraine screening, which also uses MRI. And the goal would be to, number one, create more access, which I know the field of radiology is working on proactively, including with mobile systems. Second, to develop what we would think of as surrogates. So you predict from the brain measures what behavior, cognition, digital signatures actually can be predicted from the brain and be used to scale further and monitor and potentially determine when is it the right time for someone to actually come in for a scan.
No, that's exactly the vision that I think we need. Olu, I mean, this was amazing work. Many people don't know that the prevalence of suicide among older adults isn't really significantly different from across the lifespan, but the ratio of attempts to completed suicide is almost 1-to-1. So we have a real risk when people are older. And so your work in really trying to track post-treatment is very important. I'm wondering, does this work necessitate an AI model? You know, we're so good at the fundamental statistics in our field, and where would the value of AI come in?
Yeah, so is this working? I think to Leanne's earlier point, I think thinking about ways that we can have proxy measures of some of the things that we capture with neuroimaging, that there may be a role with AI identifying features for more tractable measurements that would map onto some of the things that we could do with neuroimaging. Because, you know, I was just having this discussion earlier today about whether people are going to actually pay for all of these scans, but there might be cheaper, more accessible formats that are informed by AI.
You know, it's so true and so essential to think of those approaches. Do you think psychiatry as a field is ready for AI approaches? I mean, we've been so trained to hypothesis-driven research. Our diagnostic manual says statistical. We really have some of that excellent training, Helena Kramer and others. You know, it seems often that AI can be characterized as a fishing expedition. Are there approaches we can take to re-educating folks about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is what was brought up earlier today about sort of the vast amounts of data that we can collect now that I think are really only addressable with tools like AI. So, you know, you're going to hear later today from my colleague, Alex Liao, about, you know, digital phenotyping, and we can capture all kinds of data from all kinds of devices that inform us about our behavior, our cognition, our thoughts, our actions. And so I think, you know, it's important for people to understand that AI It's like any other thing. It can be used for harm, it could be used for good. And I think educating clinicians about that is really important.
That's terrific. Are there any questions from you? Yes.
So my question, I mean, one of the things I just learned today was about the age, that there is sort of, there are differences sort of in the age spectrum. And let's talk about late life. I'm someone who's interested in the human potential of the youth, and involved in Stanford with 2 kids who are very different, and executive functioning has been different, both of them. But it was always said that depression is the one that causes cognitive therapy as opposed to the other way. And I was just wondering, I mean, this is fantastic work. And I was just wondering, as a proponent of Dr. Williams, what is it that we can do? Because it's obvious that cognitive therapy should be just done in school. Like that should be sort of, instead of just studying math and statistics and whatever else. Cognitive training seems to be a precursor for mental health all throughout the life. So you know what I mean? I'm also curious about AI, whether it's agentic AI or just AI, to help maybe, because the youth are ready. They don't want their human potential to be wasted, but they're not able to sort of go to that next step.
So Leanne, maybe to you first, and then Olu.
You always ask fantastic questions. So what can we do for I agree, the younger generation is ready and understands mental health. So in my mind, it's a suite of things. One is fundamentally incorporating mental health into our education, because we learn from when we're very young about road safety, general health, and we kind of scared, I think, to just say mental health is part of all of us. It's our brain is our biggest asset. Let's learn about how it functions and when might it be disrupted, and just have that actually part of the education. That, I think, leads naturally to the kinds of solutions that you're talking about. Same as we have so many apps and training programs to help us get physically fit. We can then think about, well, it's a natural, it's part of our health, our brain health, to have all those available. And to understand your point about, we have now learned that poor cognition, which is so important to how we function, is not a consequence of mental illness. So we really need to pay attention to it. There are so many concrete ways we can answer it. I wonder if Olu's got some more.
Well, I was just thinking about, I have a 9-year-old daughter, and I've been struck by how many things that I didn't learn about until I was in residency that they're learning early on in elementary school, right? There are books for kids on mindfulness, right? My daughter's school now, they have a digital wellness curriculum as part of it. So we're seeing, I think, more of these approaches being done and addressing a lot of the issues that you're talking about.
Anyone else? Yes, right here.
Dr. Williams, you talked about the different biotypes, but one thing is the overlap between the biotypes. Again, I think one of the things you did highlight is precision in terms of which part of the brain these biotypes originate. But are there, again, when you characterize them, is there overlap between the biotypes, and how do you then direct them towards a specific biotype for treatment?
Such a great question. Thank you for asking it. And this is about, do the biotypes that I talk about overlap? The ones that I focused on, I purposely focused on the brain circuits that are independent of each other as a starting point. So that results in, we can actually classify independently biotypes for 90% of the people with depression that we've looked at. And this is a very pragmatic approach. So we are saying, here are 6 brain circuits that we've already found there's independent sources of information. And so we have shown through our machine learning models that each 90% of people have that primary dysfunction that's most notable. It's the highest or the lowest. Many people will have a second dysfunction, but it usually will be of lower magnitude. And this is where the next step is to see how can we now refine this and explore further. It's unlikely it's going to continue to be nicely, neatly separated. So we want to really do that deep dive into the bigger data sets with more powerful models and really look at how can we expand them and really work out where the boundaries are, and are there combinations of circuits that are important in some cases.
And that's probably where the value of AI approaches will become particularly important. And also, we talked today a lot about brain and cognition, certainly including cognition, as we did in the exposure therapy case. Not only was it the circuit that was involved, but then adding performance objectively on attentional measures actually added significantly to our understanding of a group of individuals who did not respond. So those are the refinements. And just as if the story isn't complex enough, you know, we haven't talked about stress, sleep, so many of the other physiological systems that may also be particularly valuable for actually carving out domain areas where, in fact, people don't exhibit the best treatment response. So it's really, and this is particularly evident in geriatric psychiatry, I believe, Olu, because when you talk about polypharmacy, it's the nature of the beast as we all get older. Yes, so I think we have here and then there. Yeah, I should, yes, I'm being very hemispheric specific in my question.
So obviously we know that depression and mental health as a whole is very heterogeneous. So I'm very curious about how you see the biotyping in the diagnostics process. Do you think in 10 years we will laugh at like the way we currently diagnose mental health and it will be completely redefined in that way?
Yeah, I can address that. I think, yeah, it's a real problem in our field that, you know, when we diagnose somebody with depression, it's equivalent to diagnosing somebody with a fever, right? We don't know what the cause is. But, you know, with Leanne's approach, we're getting to a more etiologic, you know, pathophysiological way of defining diagnoses that will lead to more specific treatments, right? And so, you know, I think we're laughing at how we diagnose things now. But I think with the work that we're all doing collectively, you know, we're working on a new version of the DSM that will hopefully be out in 3 years. And there's a lot of discussion about how do we incorporate the kind of work that Leanne is doing into the next version of the DSM? How do we create a pathway for biomarkers to be a part of our diagnostic process? I think that's really important.
On this side. And then I think we have a question at the back there too.
This one is
yeah.
Excellent talks. Thank you all so much. I was intrigued to hear about the ways that we can use the depression biotypes for intervention, but I'm also very curious about how they could be used for prevention. So has there been any research into where these circuit dysfunctions manifest neurodevelopmentally or when they manifest relative to clinical symptoms?
There's, I don't think as yet as applied in terms of using Leanne's models at an earlier developmental stage. And I think, but there is definite interest. And there are a lot of data sets where, in fact, imaging has occurred where we could look at the various biotype data and circuits to glean more. We know in childhood disorders, there's a lot of interest, particularly in disorders that also have cognition at their base, like autism, for example. There are probably good extant data sets that could be examined to look specifically at these questions. And it relates to Nusha's point earlier that should we be capturing this earlier in the lifespan and sort of have cognitive exercising or enhancement of these particular biotypes right from the get-go. That I think would be the ultimate dream. We had a question and then I think we maybe, yes.
One in the back.
Yeah, that's where, one in the back, over
One
there.
here.
Yeah.
And one over here, then one.
There you go.
Okay. Hi, thank you for the talk. You mentioned one of the primary goals is really to develop this personalized treatment plan and reduce the trial and error approach, and how there's more precision in other aspects of medicine. But oftentimes, even in other parts of medicine, there is a trial and error approach before you get to the imaging. For example, with migraines, you have to take all the different standard medicines. If that doesn't work, then you leave to imaging. You have an injury, you start with physical therapy. If that doesn't work, you go into imaging. So how do you see your research, or just generally that approach, changing specifically within mental health?
Yes, you.
It's a great question. And that's part of my emphasis on saying these trials need to be done in the real world setting, so they mirror the decisions. I think the main thing for mental health is to reduce the really long period of trial and error, because depression 7 years in general in the field, it's 11. So I would anticipate, and I'm sure my clinical colleagues would say there would need to be that similar approach following clinical guidelines, but just to shorten that time to selecting.
And you said we have one last question.
Hi, I appreciate all your work. I'm not gonna worry about it. I wondered if there's studies done on the consistency of looking at a functional MRI and diagnosing a biotype over time with treatment or without treatment, because my postulation is that the brain changes. And how can you label somebody kind of like with a photograph of a functional MRI at one point, and then not recognize that it changes with, you know, social determinants of health or other treatments, and label that person?
Definitely to you, Lee.
It's a great question. So maybe we go back to the cardiology analogy of you would have a system, let's say blood pressure, too high, too low, you're trying to get back in the healthy range. So the circuits that we're measuring in our case, they can be reliably measured over time. What does change, and we want to change, is when that circuit is outside of the healthy range. So we can identify, is there, and we're calling it a biotype, which implies fixed, but we're really meaning what is the problem that we're identifying. So if it's too high, the measurement is stable, but we can track that, we can restore it to the healthy range.
Which is the value of Leanne's continual assessment of how other fields are approaching this in medicine, because so often we're a little more reticent in mental health. And one last question that has been trying to get in, right? Yeah.
Sure, thank you. My question is actually sourced from having a loved one who passed 25 years ago, the brain condition. That's okay. So I have a question about a cheaper test. Do the 6 biotypes you have identified have any chemical or excretion trail? So obviously a blood test or a swab is much cheaper. So I'm just wondering, has the chemical aspect been investigated?
Olu, I think we bring that to you.
Yeah, there's actually, I participated in a symposium yesterday, and I believe Steve Hyman is part of this huge psychiatric biomarkers network, where they are focused on more fluid-based, whether it's CSF, blood, type of biomarkers for different psychiatric conditions. So there is work on that. Now, how that maps onto Leanne's biotypes, I'm not sure, but that work is happening sort of in parallel.
Maybe I take the one challenge we have is exactly the issue you highlighted about this focus on the cost of imaging, and that's something I really think is worth revisiting. We spend a lot of time working with radiology and healthcare providers, and the modeling, the cost is manageable when you look at the equivalent cost separate from, say, a facility's cost, and you compare it to what you save if you're getting someone well in I mean, less than 7 years, let's say we can get them well within a few weeks. So the modeling, I think, it hasn't been done as in a clear way yet for our field, but I think it's a really important case to make because we benefit from existing workflows that exist for every other area of medicine, whereas we absolutely need to look at blood-based markers, all sorts. It's how to build those clinical pathways in our field. Yeah. So thank you
Terrific.
for your question.
So I think that's probably it, so we don't go over. Thank you to everyone. And don't hesitate to reach out to us all during the symposium if you have additional questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you for such an engaging and thoughtful discussion. We'll now take a break and reconvene at 10:50. So please